contact between the different Canaanite dialects during the Persian period in Palestine, in particular between Phoenician and Hebrew, as well as applying multidisciplinary methods and comparing modern Palestinian Arabic dialects and the ancient linguistic milieu. In recent articles, he proposes that Phoenician has a significant role in shaping late biblical Hebrew. Currently, Dr. Cohen serves as the head of the Hebrew language department at the University of Haifa. Ohad, without further ado, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Steve. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so Steve, thank you very much. And also, I would like to thank Nili for organizing this workshop. Many years ago, Shlomo Nae wrote an article on the alternation between mem and nun in rabbinical Hebrew. And the name that he gave to this article was Shtei Sugyot Nedoshot Beleshon Chazal, two well-studied topics in rabbinical Hebrew. So one can raise the question also here regarding the mem nun alternation mem nun in LBH. This is a well-studied topic, and the question is why to go back to this topic once again. And the answer that I'm trying to give today is that the observation on the data of these specific phenomena can help us with the second part of my lecture today, and it is the historical framework of LBH. So I'm using one example here, the alternation between mem and nun in the feminine, second and third feminine pronoun, in order to illustrate something more wide and I think more important regarding the historical framework of LBH. So what do we see? When we read LBH text, we see that to some extent, there is alternation between second and third feminine pronouns. For example, Veshavtem elai ushmartem mitzvotai, mitzvah is a feminine, ve'asitem otam, and not otan. היחנו האבנים מערימות העפר והם השרופות. We will go back to the data. But before continuing with the data, I would like to say something about our historical model, or the model that we use in order to describe these phenomena. What you see in this slide are two models. One, geographical, physical model of Jerusalem in Second Temple period. You can find this model in Jerusalem. And the second one is the historical model of LBH. I quote here Avi Horowitz from the Encyclopedia of Hebrew Language from 2013. So what do we see in this historical model? According to Avi Horowitz, we see four parameters: Persian loanwords, case of late Aramaic interference, rabbinical Hebrew elements, and independent inner biblical Hebrew. This is the historical model that we are using. And when I'm saying we, I include myself in this. I'm teaching LBH for the last more than 20 years. And for many, many years, I use Avi Horowitz methodology. By the way, I'm one of his students, and also Professor Fasber here, student. And I thought for my student, this historical framework. Today, I think that this historical framework is, at least problematic. It is problematic, I think, from the reason that we are dealing here with circular reasoning. Most of the argumentation that we use in our discussion are textual. And the question is what we see in LBH and what there is in LBH, and the answer is what we see. And what we see is what there is. And this is a typical circular reasoning. And I would like to take Avi Horowitz's historical framework and to deal with the data of the M-nun alternation in biblical Hebrew. According to Avi Horvitz's methodology, we should check, first of all, what we have in CBH, in classical biblical Hebrew. And we see in this aspect that the system is very clear. Exceptions are relatively very rare. We have mem for the masculine pronoun and nun for the feminine pronoun. The second thing that Avi Horvitz asked us to do is to check what we see in Aramaic. Checking Aramaic in this point show the following data. In archaic Aramaic, the distribution between mem and nun is quite clear. In Imperial Aramaic, the nun for feminine is stable, but we start to see categorical naturalization in the masculine pronoun. Continue to late Aramaic, we see that what started as categorical naturalization in Imperial Aramaic became categorical unification in later Aramaic. What we see in Mishnaic Hebrew, according to this article by Shlomo Naeh, we see a phonetic naturalization between mem and nun at the end of the word. This all lead us to, when we check Avi Horvitz's suggestion, the mem nun in late LBH cannot be Persian influence. It cannot be case of late Aramaic interference. It cannot be Mishnaic Hebrew. So it leads us to the conclusion, and this is the common view about this point, that we are dealing here with independent inner biblical development. And this is exactly what we see, for example, in Juon Muraoka, okay? This is a morphosyntactic, not a phonological phenomena for the general tendency in Mishnaic Hebrew. Muraoka doesn't mention here the Aramaic, but it is clear that this cannot be an Aramaic either. The same thing in Qumran grammar for the Dead Sea Scrolls, even though it is a bit, Qumran say almost the same thing. Just a second. The opinion is adopted here that the extensive use of the form with mem can be defined as late feature. It means that it is not Aramaic, it is not Mishnaic Hebrew, this is an inner development of the LBH. Let's see what Polzin is doing. Polzin wrote quite intense in his book on this topic. And what you can see here is how he struggled with the data. He struggled with the data, with the explanation, and his perspective is interesting. He starts with the fact that Cropper appeals to Aramaic influence, and he rejects that. Okay, it cannot be. His position appears incorrect. Okay, it cannot be an Aramaic influence. By the time of the Proto-Mishnaic means that he is also considering the option that Mishnaic Hebrew was influenced here, and he rejects this option. Okay. And he concludes to a certain point, the reason for such change can only be surmised. Okay, and he say that he try also to suggest that we have pronoun influence of perhaps the pronoun influence of the Aramaic was responsible for the contra effort of the Hebrew. Okay, but he also rejects this explanation. He continued in his discussion, and he mentioned here the option raised by Dahoud some years before, during the 40s, that we are dealing here with Phoenician or Punic phenomena. I will get back to these two articles by Dahoud because I think they are important. Dahoud spoke about the language of Kohelet. Okay, it can be asked perhaps if we might not have in this feature a Phoenician or Punic isoglyphs. The evidence did not allowed us to come to a decision. Okay, but he left that with a question mark. I would like to say only a few words about the Hood and about these two articles. The Hood is, how to say, usually we ignore him. Usually we ignore him, and this is how to say, this is in the good case, okay? But I recommend you to go back to these two articles. By the way, this year it's anniversary of 70 years of these two articles about Canaanite Phoenician influence in Kohelet. I think we can ignore the historical framework that the Hood suggests there, because I think it is irrelevant. But if we read carefully his grammatical analysis, I think he saw very clearly something very, very interesting, something very, very interesting in these two articles. What both Paulson and the Hood didn't know. What you see here, I took this map from the internet. By the way, this is a regular map of the Persian period. The geographical manifestation of the historical model here, I would like to suggest, is completely false. What we see here, we see on the left Phoenician settlement, okay, in green, and on the right we see the Persian Empire, like two separate entities. And I think that in many of our discussions, even though not having this map in mind, this is the story that we are telling to ourselves. But this is a completely false story, according to what I will show very briefly. Because I haven't found the right map that show what I'm trying to say, I just took Google Map and write the situation with my own pen. And actually, this is what happened during the Persian period. Okay, we have to remember that during the Persian period, Carthage is in the peak of its controlling the Mediterranean. Okay, the Persians are using the Phoenician naval power in order to fight against Greek. So you can see that the line of, if to say, the lingua franca of the Persian period, Aramaic, goes along with the Phoenician during the Mediterranean coast in Israel. How do we know that? We know that today from thousands of findings. Let's start with the textual evidence. From the Bible and outside the Bible, it is very clear that during the Persian period, the entire coast was Phoenician. Okay, in Eshmon Ezer sarcophag, these sarcophags tell us that the Lord of Kings, the Persian emperor, gave Dor, Joppa, and the plan of the Sharon to the Phoenician. In the book of Ezra, Joppa also was given by Curius, the king of Persia. In the Periplus of the South of Scyllus, okay, Akko, Dor, Ashkelon are Phoenician settlements. Until some 30 years ago, the Persian period in archaeology in Israel was kind of dark ages or dark periods. But this situation was changed during the last 30 years dramatically. What you can see here is a survey, archaeological survey, or conclusion of many surveys in the southern part of or the town of Ashdod and Ashkelon. As you can see, how dense are the Phoenician settlements. More than that, you can see that the settlement get inside the land along the rivers, and that's very interesting in this perspective. While constructing Road 6, Kvish 6, the authority of antiquity did some rescue digging in order to prevent the loss of the archaeological data. What you can see here is what I tried to show in the map. Okay, this is a finding from Moshav El-Yachin, which in the Sharon plain, and if you remember from the Ashmon Ezer sarcophagus, the Sharon plain was given by the Persian emperor to the Phoenician king. So what you can see here is side by side, on the right Aramaic inscription, and on the left Phoenician inscription. This leads me to the model that I would like to suggest here. Now, what you see on the left is not a model that is built on textual argumentation. What we see on the left is, if you want, a summary of the sum of the archaeological findings. So what do we see during the Persian period in the southern part of Israel? We have a multilingual reality, which is built from an international, one component is the international imperial language, Persian. Another component is the international administrative language, Aramaic. Third language is the canonical language, which is called CBH. I will get back to that. And variety of local spoken Canaanite dialects, which includes the Transjordan Canaanite in the south, Edomite in Edom. By the way, if the perspective was the south, we should also include here Arabic, which is present. The Arabic comes into the Negev along with the Transjordan Canaanite. We see Central Canaanite, Northern Coastal Canaanite, which is we can call it Phoenician, and the Rabbinical Hebrew. I will not enter the question whether the Rabbinical Hebrew is a northern inland Canaanite from the Galil or from the Shfela, central lowland Canaanite. For me, the Rabbinical Hebrew is another Canaanite dialect that play in this melting pot. So what is the LBH from this historical perspective? LBH is a literary manifestation of multilingual reality. And what Avi Horvitz's model is missed is the relationship between the local spoken varieties and the canonical language. The canonical language is not the LBH. And every component here in this model has an influence on the LBH. And by the way, it has interrelationship with every other aspect. For example, if we take the axis of canonical language and local spoken varieties, and we think about, for example, about the Arabic continuum between the Fusha and Amia, okay? We can explain, for example, the difference of the distribution of the She versus Asher in Chronicle versus Kohelet. In Chronicles, we have only two examples of she, excuse me, and in Kohelet, I think it's almost 50% she versus Asher. Okay, so the distribution can be chronolect, saying that Kohelet is later, so the influence is bigger, but it can also be explained on the axis or on the tense between canonical and Deuteronomy try to be canonical-like, so there is less Phoenician in it, and versus Kohelet, which is not dealing with a question of canon. And so it represents something much more free concerning the influence of the spoken varieties. Going back to our data, adding this new model, okay, historical model, we can see very clear that it is very easy to explain the categorical naturalization in LBH as a Phoenician calque, because in Phoenician, as is well known, mem applies both for masculine and feminine pronoun. So very easily we can say that the mem was the distribution in the Punic language or in the Phoenician language was responsible for this categorical naturalization in LBH and not as an inner development. In other article, I called the situation here Canaanite melting pot. And I think what we have during the Persian period is a situation of very, very, very intense language, spoken language contact between very close Canaanite dialects. Now, dealing with the phenomena of language contacts, if we go, for example, for the work of Yaron Matras, who deal with this aspect, Yaron Matras speak, and also Weinreich, speak about borability scale. Okay, there are some phenomena that are more suspect to be influenced in a situation of an intense language contacts. And these categories are, according to Yaron Matras, subordination, agreement, and TMA. Going back to LBH, we can see that these are subordination in red, agreement in blue, and TMA in green are the exact phenomena in which I believe Phoenician affected or changed the LBH. For example, the relative pronoun she, this is a Punic ending. The use of the definite article before katal, kol ha-higdish. The use of the construction ma plus she as a relative marker, ma she, this is a Phoenician construction. The use of she plus lamed as mark of indirect genitive, mitato she li shlomo. I don't have time to show you, but believe me, these are very, very, very well established Phoenician constructions. The multiplicity of asyndetic relative clause is also a very well-established Phoenician phenomena. Agreement, we discussed imachem and hema, but also the disagreement in definition of noun and adjective. This is the question of agreement in Phoenician of the definite article is very, very problematic concerning biblical Hebrew, because it is much less organized. And also the TMA, okay, the use of the infinitive construct and the use of the infinitive absolute. If you ask yourself, where do we find Phoenician in LBH? I will not exaggerate by saying almost everywhere. It is so close to Hebrew, and it is for many, many years, we consider that all these phenomena that I've counted here as an inner Hebrew development, that we don't see the connection between the Hebrew and the Phoenician. For example, if I'm only counting she, the use of liktol as predicative and katol as predicative, you can see that we have hundreds of cases. If I'm counting all the list that I put here, and it's only a partial list, I would take the unconscious saying that it is as important, Phoenician is as important as Aramaic during this period in LBH. And actually what I'm saying here does go with the words, hand by hand with the words of Nehemiah, very famous. What Nehemiah is telling us, this saying is something that we have to it is very, very complicated what Nehemiah say here. But in some aspect, what he say to us here, he said that there is a Canaanite melting pot. There is a situation of a very, very intense language contact between this close Canaanite dialect. How does Canaanite melting pot look like? If one would like to see, I would recommend to go to Ostrakhan from Idumea and to check the personal names. There is this Canaanite melting pot can be seen very, very easily here as against the Aramaic general framework of these texts. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I was muted. We already have a question. Aaron, go ahead.
Thank you, Ohad. I really appreciate the interdisciplinary nature of that, and I completely agree on the Kohelet that it cannot be merely chronology. There has to be something else there. How exactly? And I suspect it's more than one factor. Regarding the methodology, I have a question on how far you want to extend it, because of, there are lots of continuity features between late biblical Hebrew and Qumran Hebrew and rabbinic Hebrew. So would you want to extend the concept of Phoenician contact or influence into those dialects or chronolects or whatever you want to call them? How far does it go?
Well, thank you very much for this. Is a very interesting question, Aaron. Very, very interesting. I think I'm separating a little bit between Qumran Hebrew and Mishnaic Hebrew. And I know I'm going to enter now into a minefield, but I will do, okay? There is, in history, we know that the Third Punic War, okay, ended Carthage, and then we see a decline in the Phoenician world. I do believe that the formative years were in LBH were the Persian period. But the influence didn't stop there, because all the material, all the influence, all the content, very, very intense contact continue also after the Persian period, although there was a declination. So what entered the Hebrew during the Persian period continued directly, and we can see it also in Qumran Hebrew. Now, regarding the Mishnaic Hebrew, I would say my opinion here, okay? I do believe that Mishnaic Hebrew the Zitzim Laban comes from Galilee, okay? I do believe that. And I think that all the years, if you think about Galilee, about geography, there isn't such a big difference, I don't know, between Nazareth and Haifa. It's so close. And the Bible itself teach us that the Zevulun and the Asher didn't withdraw the Phoenician from these territories. So I do believe, and this is another topic, that rabbinical Hebrew, think about the Shin. One example, okay, has this is not my field, so I'm hesitant saying that, but I do believe that Phoenician has a huge influence on rabbinical Hebrew, but I'm not sure that it starts in the Persian period. It's even older, because it is so close.
Okay, thank you. Benjamin, Naama, and Noam, but I'll ask you three to ask short questions so that we don't go over too much. Benjamin.
Thanks a lot. I like the overview of Phoenician influence a lot, specifically about the feminine plural. However, I don't quite see why Aramaic influence is off the table. Of course, Aramaic doesn't have mem for the feminine plural, but in Imperial Aramaic and the consonantal text of Biblical Aramaic, we do see that the third masculine forms are used for third person feminine. So could it not be an extension of that type that's used in Hebrew? We use the masculine for the feminine, even though it's with a mem.
That's true, but the direction in Aramaic is toward nun, and the direction in LBH is toward mem, and that was the reason why Polzin, Qumran, etc., reject the option that we're dealing here with Phoenician. Look, there are things, I'm not saying Aramaic is not important. Aramaic is very important for LBH. It is. But what I'm trying to say is it's not the only parameter. And we have to understand the function of Aramaic during a Persian period. And this is administrative language. By the way, Steve mentioned the fact that I'm using models from modern Palestinian language. I think that the Palestinian situation in modern Israel is an amazing tool to understand the LBH period, because we see also 4 parameters: imperial language, English, administrative language, Hebrew, Fusha is the canon, and the Amia is the local variety. So we can, using this carefully, okay, we can imagine the historical situation. But we cannot exclude, what I'm trying to say, that we cannot exclude the Amia or the local varieties from our consideration. Why Polzin and Protat exclude this? Because we didn't knew, okay? During the 50s, the 70s, all these researchers that I saw haven't been exist. It was dark age. Today we know that the southern part of Israel, where the influence of Phoenician was huge, huge. And they go along the rivers and find the Judean in the Shfela, and the settlement were like that, okay? So this is the historical situation, thousands of findings today.
Okay, Naama, quickly, please.
Okay, so first of all, Uri Mor wrote about the alternation, and he has a different explanation, which you may want to look at. The other thing is that I think Matras and Weinreich are not the right model to use here, because they don't talk about languages that are related to each other. So you need to look at other models. And finally, some of the traits that you're talking about are actually very common in Semitic, and there's a very natural progression. For example, Sheli is a very natural phenomenon that happen in other languages. They don't have to be in contact with each other. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is Phoenician.
Okay, thank you, Naama. What I'm trying to say here, that if you take each and every phenomena separately, you might be right. We can come with many different explanations, and in comparative Semitic, we can find explanation for many things. What I'm trying to say that we should not start from LBH. We should start from the historical findings, and then ask ourselves how these historical findings reflect in LBH. If we start from the historical findings, the situation of the Canaanite melting pot today in the southern part of Israel is something that we cannot neglect. It is the historical situation in thousands of evidence. We can see it. I'm talking about clay, okay? All these settlements that considered to be Phoenician is because the clay come from Tzor and Sidon. We just have to read the text of our friends, the archaeological friends, okay, and the historical ones. The Canaanite melting pot, or what Nehemiah teaches us about the history, about this, חציים מדברים אשדודית ואינם יודעים לדבר יהודית. This is what I'm talking about. And this is the genuine historical situation. Think about the Palestinian situation today versus 100 years ago. In the Amia, 100 years ago, the one that come from the city, the dialect was very different from the one that come from the village. The Bedouin dialect was very different from the settled dialect. The Christian was very different from the Muslim. Today we have a mishpacha, and this is the exact historical situation that we have in the southern part of Israel during the Persian period. And I'm not talking about texts. I'm not talking about linguistic phenomena. I'm talking about archaeological evidence, which are thousands. Inscriptions, texts,
Ohad,
and so on. Yeah.
Ohad, I apologize for cutting it short, but we have to finish. I want to thank the 3 speakers for very stimulating papers, the participants for stimulating questions.